She moved through the dense forest with silent steps, her eyes fixed on the path ahead, the shadows shifting like living things around her as she gripped the weapon in her hand, the cold metal grounding her in the moment, her breath steady, her pulse a quiet drum in her ears. She had studied him, she had mapped his roots, his habits, his weaknesses. She had laid the trap with precision, with patience, with the kind of care only someone who understood the hunt could manage, and she knew without a doubt that he would come. She had been tracking him for weeks now, his movements as fluid as the wind, his presence a whisper. Among the trees he had evaded others, he had slipped through nets and chains, he had left behind ghosts of himself and hollow trails that led nowhere. But she had been careful, she had been deliberate, and she had been ruthless. She had seen the patterns where others had seen chaos. She had found the cracks in the armor where others had seen an impenetrable wall, and she knew this time he would not escape. She reached the clearing where she had prepared the ground, the earth disturbed in ways only she would recognize, the hidden lines of her design threading invisibly beneath the leaves and broken twigs. Her heart quickened in her chest as she positioned herself in the perfect spot where she would see him, where she would know the instant he stepped into her snare, where she would finally bring this game to an end. But as the moments stretched, and the silence deepened, and the air seemed to thicken around her, a cold realization began to creep into her mind. She had been so certain, so sure of her control, so confident in the power of her plan. But something was wrong, something was off. The balance had shifted without her knowing. The strings of the trap she had so carefully woven were no longer in her hands. And then she heard it, the sound of breath behind her, slow, deliberate, controlled. The feeling of eyes watching, of a presence just beyond her sight. Her grip on the weapon tightened, but suddenly, it did not feel like enough. Suddenly, it felt like nothing. She turned, but the world seemed to move slower than her body, the shadows swallowing her movements before they could be complete, before she could react, before she could understand. And then she felt it, the pull of unseen threads around her wrists, her ankles, her throat. The trap closing, not around him, but around her. Her own design now, a cage, a prison, a carefully crafted end that was never meant for him at all. His voice came like a whisper from the dark, like a hand brushing against the edge of her mind, like the ghost of a thing she had never truly known. You thought you were the hunter, he said, but you were never more than the bait. And as the last light of the setting sun flickered through the trees, and her vision blurred and her pulse became the only sound she could hear, she finally understood. She had never been pulling the strings at all. She struggled against the invisible bonds, her breath coming in sharp gasps. As he stepped closer, his silhouette a shifting shadow against the dying light, she tried to reach for her weapon, but it was gone, plucked from her grasp as easily as a leaf torn from its branch. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, a mistake to undo, a weakness in him that she had somehow overlooked. But there was nothing, only the certainty that she had walked into something far greater than herself. He leaned in close, his breath a ghost against her skin, and for the first time she saw his eyes, dark pools that held no malice, no anger, only inevitability. You were always meant to lose, he whispered, his voice curling around her like a promise, like a curse. And then the world tilted, the ground vanished, the air rushed past her ears in a violent whisper, and she was falling into the endless dark, into the silence of a story that had never been hers to tell.